She was nobody, a waitress counting tips, praying she'd make rent. Then, in 3 seconds, she became the most dangerous woman in the city, not because she carried a weapon, but because she threw her body onto a floor of shattered glass to save a child she'd never met, a child whose father just happens to control half the criminal underworld. Now Dante Moretti owes her a debt, and in his world, debts are never simple. This channel is your home for stories about mafia bosses, the power of human connection, and the family bonds that make even the most dangerous men kneel. Stay with us, because the best stories aren't about power. They're about the moments that create it. The lesson from Elena's story: genuine selflessness is the rarest and most powerful thing in a world built on calculation. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what you would have done in Elena's shoes, share this with someone who loves a good romance, and subscribe because we drop new stories every week, and you do not want to miss what comes next.
I will spend as long as necessary to repay, he said, his voice a low, inescapable promise that held none of the gratitude it should have. Behind him, Matteo smiled, clutching his toy car, completely unaware his father's words had just become silk chains wrapped around my life. The glass in my back pulsed with every beat of my heart, a painful reminder that I was no longer invisible. I had been noticed, marked, and claimed, and I would pay my debts. This one, his gaze locked with mine, dark and absolute, I would take as long as I need to settle. It was a debt he believed I owed him, yet it was I who was in his debt. He looked at my face, then down at the glass jutting from my shoulder like some grotesque piece of jewelry, and his expression hardened. A surge of rage so intense it felt like the air itself was crackling. "I'm all right," I murmured, a lie we both recognized. "Is he? Is Matteo all right?" "You knew his name." His dark eyes narrowed, studying me with a focus that felt like being peeled apart layer by layer. "How did you know his name?" "I overheard you. Just now." My explanation tumbled out, weak and unconvincing. Everything ached. It was all wrong. I had shattered the primary rule of survival: never get noticed. "Papa, she protected me," Matteo piped up, having squirmed free. His small hands reached for my face, his touch so gentle it made my eyes sting. The glass was about to hit me, but she dove in front. The man, his father, stayed motionless, his hands still resting on my shoulders, a palpable tension radiating from him like heat off summer pavement. The whole restaurant seemed to be holding its breath. Sophie was somewhere in the background, sobbing apologies to anyone who would listen. Marcus had shown up with a first aid kit, but lingered a safe 10 feet away, afraid to come closer to the corner booth without being invited. Without permission from the man whose son I'd just saved, whose child I'd dared to touch. "What is your name?" he asked, and the way he said it made it clear that silence wasn't an option. "Elena," I breathed. "Elena Santos. Elena." He repeated my name slowly, as if tasting it. In his mouth, my name was transformed into something else entirely, something precious, something dangerous, something that now belonged to him. "I'm Dante Moretti." The name landed with the force of a physical blow, its ripples spreading through the room. I saw the recognition flash across the faces of the staff, the manager who suddenly materialized looking ghostly and scared, and the few diners who understood what that name signified: Moretti. The clan that controlled half the city's criminal world and owned enough legitimate businesses to feign decency. The name from hushed warnings and news stories that never told the full story. I had just thrown myself in front of the son of the city's most feared man. I should go clean up," I stammered, trying to get up, to flee, but Dante's grip on my shoulder was gentle, yet unyielding. "You're going to a hospital," he declared. "Marco." He didn't shout, but one of the other men from the booth was instantly by his side, phone already out. Get Dr. Russo on the line. Tell him to meet us at the estate, and find out who was responsible for this. He gestured toward the shattered glass and the still weeping Sophie. Accident. The word dripped with suspicion. Sir, honestly, I can just go to the emergency room. I have insurance. Well, sort of. The lie faded on my tongue as Dante finally let go of my shoulder and rose to his feet, his sheer presence making the grand dining room feel small and cramped. You saved my son, he said, his voice low but carrying so that everyone strained to listen. You threw yourself in the path of danger for a boy you do not know. Whatever life you had before this moment, your plans, your troubles, your entire existence, has just been altered. Now, Elena Santos, I settle my accounts, and this account, his eyes captured mine, dark and binding, I will take all the time in the world to repay. It should have been a comfort. It felt more like a verdict, a promise, and something far more threatening than either. Behind him, Mateo held his toy car and gave me a gap-toothed, innocent grin, oblivious that his father's words had just shackled me. The shards in my back throbbed with my pulse, each beat a fresh reminder that I had been seen, marked, and now claimed by a man whose beauty was as sharp and frightening as the life he led. It was his eyes that had captured me. They should have been icy, calculating, the eyes of a man who orders fear like other men order coffee. But they burned with an intensity that made me feel truly seen for the very first time in years, dangerously seen. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm of glass was over. The restaurant filled with shocked gasps and scraping chairs, but our corner was wrapped in a deafening quiet. I stayed curled over the boy, my body shaking from adrenaline. Do not move, a deep voice from above me had said, the words smooth with an accent that was unmistakably Italian. Matteo, are you injured? The child, Matteo, whimpered but managed a quiet, No, Papa. Papa. Dear God, what had I gotten myself into? Strong but careful hands gripped my shoulders, avoiding the worst of the glass. Look at me, the voice commanded, and despite every instinct telling me to run and disappear, I tilted my head up. The man kneeling over me took what little breath I had left. He was stunning in the way predators often are, with a chiseled jaw, dark eyes holding unknowable depths, and a faint scar tracing a silver path from his eyebrow to his hairline. His suit was perfectly tailored, untouched by the chaos. But I hadn't been thinking. Thinking is a luxury for people who have something left to lose. My body had simply moved, driven by the same survival instinct that got me through evictions and broken hearts. The water pitcher had fallen from my grasp, shattering on the marble as I launched myself forward. 3 steps. That was the only distance between being invisible and being unforgettable. I threw myself over the child, a shield of flesh and bone against the glittering rain. His small body vanished under mine as I tucked him in, turning my back to the storm. The first glass hit my shoulder blade, a searing blast of pain that stole my breath. Then came another, and another, a drumming of breaking crystal and shredding fabric. I could feel the champagne soaking my uniform, mixing with the warmer feel of blood. It was my blood. Definitely mine. The boy beneath me was screaming, but the sound was muffled against my chest as I held him tighter, taking every impact, every sharp sting of glass that dug into my back like a constellation of pure agony. Time had stretched into syrup, thick and slow. Sophie's high heel had snagged on the rug's edge, a tiny, overlooked flaw. The tray tipped. Crystal flutes began their slow, graceful fall, catching the light from the chandeliers, becoming beautiful, lethal missiles aimed straight for the corner booth, aimed straight for the child. The boy looked up, his dark eyes wide, his toy car stilled in his hand. He was too young to understand the danger, too young to know to run. The men at his side were already moving, but they were too late, reaching for a child directly in the path of falling, jagged glass. I should have kept my eyes down, focused on my job, on staying invisible. But the innocence in that child's face tightened my chest with a powerful longing that felt like a physical ache. I had wanted that once, a child, a family, a life that was more than just counting tips and praying I could make rent. But Michael had destroyed that dream when he walked out, his apologies as hollow as the engagement ring he hawked to cover his gambling losses. Miss. At table 7, the middle-aged couple celebrating their anniversary gestured at their empty water glasses. I blinked, pasted on a smile that didn't reach my eyes, and poured their water, my hands steady only from years of practice, not from peace. The husband ignored me. The wife gave a distracted nod. To them, I was just part of the room, useful and forgettable. As I started to turn away, I heard it. A sharp crack, then a woman's scream from the booth right behind me. Not the corner booth, where the men smelled of danger and money, but the one next to it, where a waitress named Sophie was trying to balance a tray piled high with champagne glasses. Time became syrup, thick and slow. Sophie's heel caught on the carpet's edge, a small traitorous fold that housekeeping had missed. The tray tilted. Crystal glasses began their inevitable descent, catching the chandelier light as they fell, transforming into deadly, beautiful projectiles aimed directly at the corner booth, directly at the child. The boy looked up, his dark eyes wide, toy car frozen mid-vroom. He didn't understand, didn't know to move. The men beside him were already in motion, but they were too far, too slow, reaching for a child who sat in the direct path of raining glass and sharp edges. I didn't think. Thinking was a luxury for people who had something to lose. My body moved on, instinct, the same instinct that had carried me through evictions and heartbreak, and nights when giving up seemed easier than breathing. The pitcher dropped from my hands, water exploding across marble as I lunged forward. 3 steps. That's all it took to cross the distance between invisible and unforgettable. I threw myself over the child, my body a shield of flesh and bone against the glittering cascade. His small form disappeared beneath me as I curled around him, my back to the storm. The first glass shattered against my shoulder blade, a white-hot burst of pain that stole my breath. Then another and another, a percussion of breaking crystal and tearing fabric. I felt the champagne soak through my uniform, mixing with something warmer blood. Probably mine. Definitely mine. The boy beneath me was screaming now, but it was muffled against my chest, and I held him tighter, absorbing each impact, each sharp kiss of broken glass embedding itself in my back like a constellation of agony. The rain was pounding the floor-to-ceiling windows of Aurelio's that night, each drop like a tiny fist. I was moving through the dining room like a phantom, silent and overlooked, important only when I wasn't there. The polished white marble mirrored the golden chandeliers, giving the illusion that I was walking on light, even though my feet only knew the pain of 12-hour shifts in cheap shoes. "Table 7 needs water," Marcus snapped as he passed, his own uniform perfectly crisp, unlike mine, which always looked borrowed. I nodded and moved, my whole life just a series of movements, always one beat behind a world that belonged to others. The crystal pitcher felt heavy and cold. Ah, so that's how it was. A person whose attention felt more dangerous than any indifference. As Dante offered his hand, I saw it all. The elegant fingers, a platinum watch flashing in the light, a signet ring with an unfamiliar crest. I knew accepting it was a point of no return, but I had no other path. I'd already leaped into his world, now it was closing around me. My shaking hand met his, and his grip felt as final as a locking door, as a cage shutting. The rich leather of Dante's car smelled of money and a subtle, expensive cologne that was worth more than my old salary. Old, because I was pretty sure I was out of a job at Aurelio's after bleeding on their perfect marble floors and causing a scene at their most important table. I sat stiffly, aware of Matteo huddled against my good side, his small hand gripping my torn uniform. Dante watched me from the opposite seat, his intense focus making my skin crawl. The driver, Marco, was silent and focused, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror. Another man named Luca sat beside him, scarred and broad, murmuring in fast Italian on his phone. I only caught snippets. L'incidente, la ragazza, il bambino. The accident, the girl, the boy. Does it hurt? Matteo's quiet voice broke the silence. A little, I lied. My back felt like it was on fire, every tiny shift a fresh wave of agony. But for this child, I felt a need to be strong, to show him that not all protection came with a future debt. I was starting to think my own debt would take a lifetime to repay. You were very brave, Matteo said, his dark eyes, so much like his father's, studying me intently. Like a hero from my stories. Are you one? No, sweet boy. I'm just a waitress. With exceptional instincts, Dante's voice cut in, sharp and smooth, and a lack of self-preservation. His gaze had been locked on me since we entered the car, making me feel both exposed and trapped. Most people would have looked away, decided it wasn't their business. Why didn't you? The question was a loaded one. I knew the answer could reveal too much, but pain and exhaustion had worn down my defenses, leaving only the simple truth. He's just a child, I answered softly. That was reason enough. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe respect, crossed Dante's face. Do you have children? No. The word came out sharp, heavy with the weight of old heartbreaks and a future that vanished when Michael left. No family, just you, Dante repeated, and his tone made it sound less like isolation and more like an opportunity. So no one is expecting you home tonight. The implication sent a chill through me. I need to call my landlord about the rent. Your rent is handled. He typed quickly on his phone. For the next year. Think of it as a down payment on my debt to you. My throat went dry. You can't do that. I don't even... It's irrelevant. He put the phone away, his eyes fixed on me. You shielded my son from flying glass. No amount of money can truly repay that, but I'll try. Your rent is paid. You will never see a medical bill. And your boss at Aurelio's has been told you are on paid, indefinite leave. So I'm fired, I said, the bitterness sharp in my throat. You're protected, Dante corrected me, his voice layered with steel. Tonight was not an accident, Elena. Someone tried to harm my son. You stepped in the way. He leaned in, making the car feel impossibly small. Now, whoever did this sees you as a witness or an accomplice. Either way, you're in danger. A cold, sharp fear sliced through the pain. What are you saying? I'm saying your anonymity, the cloak you've worn for so long, is gone. Everyone at that restaurant saw you save Matteo. By tomorrow, everyone important will know your name and your face. His jaw clenched. I can't restore your old life, but I can offer you my protection. The only question is, if you are clever enough to take it. The car passed through imposing gates that swung open on their own, revealing a long drive bordered by perfect hedges and subtle security cameras. The estate was a masterpiece of modern design and classic Italian influence, a fortress disguised as a mansion, and I was being brought inside. I don't understand any of this, I breathed, mostly to myself. This morning I was in my tiny apartment, stressing about tips and whether I could afford to get my fridge fixed. Now I'm in a car with... I stopped, remembering Matteo was listening. With someone who owes you a great deal, Dante finished for me, his voice low. And I always pay my debts, Elena. Always. As the car pulled up to the entrance, a man in a white coat with a medical bag was already waiting. Marco opened my door and offered a hand. When I tried to stand, my knees gave out. the adrenaline finally gone, leaving only pain. Dante was suddenly there, his arm firmly around my waist, supporting me with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man with the Moretti family's reputation. He smelled of fine wool and something darker, like gunpowder, the metallic scent of a dangerous life. "I can walk," I managed to say. "Indulge me." His breath was warm against my hair, and I hated that my body reacted, feeling the solid strength beneath his suit. The house was even more intimidating inside, a world of marble, dark wood, and priceless art. A woman in her 60s, dressed in black with pearls, hurried toward us, her eyes widening at my condition. "Dio mio," she gasped. "Dante, what?" "Matteo is safe, Ania. This is Elena. She saved him." Dante guided me down a hall with the doctor at our heels. "Get the blue guest room ready. She will be staying with us for a while." "What? No, I can't," I stammered, panic surging. "I have my job. I have—" "What you have," Dante interrupted, leading me into a room that rivaled a five-star hotel. "Are multiple cuts, glass in your back, and severe shock. You need medical attention and rest. We can argue tomorrow." He helped me sit on the edge of a bed with impossibly soft sheets, then stepped back for the doctor but remained in the room, leaning against the wall with that unnerving, watchful gaze. "I'll need to get her shirt off," Dr. Russo said. I felt my cheeks burn with heat. "I'll turn my back," Dante stated, not offering to leave. I knew it was useless to argue. The doctor gently worked the tattered uniform over my head, hissing softly as he saw the damage. His fingers were clinical as they explored the wounds, and I fought back a whimper. 15 lacerations, Dr. Russo announced to Dante. 3 pieces of glass are still in there. She was lucky. Nothing vital was hit, but there will be scarring. "Minimize them." Dante's voice was flat, but rage simmered beneath it. "Whatever it costs, whatever experts you need." "I will do my best," the doctor promised, then turned to me. "This part will hurt. I have to remove the glass before I can stitch you up." I nodded, clenching the bedding, bracing for the agony. But then a warm hand covered mine. Dante had moved silently to kneel beside me, his grasp surprisingly gentle. "Look at me," he ordered softly. "Not at what he's doing, at me." I met his dark, unreadable eyes, searching for an anchor as the doctor started. "Tell me about yourself, Elena Santos," Dante said, his thumb making slow circles on my hand, a perfect distraction. "Where did you grow up?" "Here," I gasped, as the first shard of glass was pulled free. "Born and raised on the east side." "Your parents?" he pushed, his grip tightening as I flinched. "They died. A car crash when I was 19. I've been alone since." The confession came easily, drawn out by the pain and the soothing motion of his thumb. "Went to community college for a bit, but I ran out of money. Been a waitress ever since." And that's how it all started. That very morning, I'd been just a waitress, worrying about tips, my broken-down fridge, and making rent on a tiny studio apartment. "What did you want?" he asked, his voice intimate, his question feeling heavy. I chewed on my lip, wincing as another stitch pulled. I wanted to be someone who meant something, someone unforgettable. How ridiculous, right? The girl who craved invisibility now wanted to be seen. "Not ridiculous," Dante said softly. "It's universal. We all want to matter, Elena. We just pursue it in different ways. I created an empire. You saved a boy. Which of those do you believe history will remember more fondly?" The question was so startlingly sincere I almost laughed. "Are you asking me to pass judgment on you?" "I am asking you to see me," he corrected. "Truly see me. Not the name, not the stories. Because I see you, Elena, and I am only just starting to comprehend what I have found." His words should have been frightening. Instead, they felt like a brand on my skin, marking me just as deeply as the cuts Dr. Russo had just closed. "All finished," the doctor declared, applying dressings with professional skill. "Keep these clean and dry. Return in 1 week for a checkup." He paused, glancing toward Dante. And try to limit your movement for a few days. The stitches must set properly. She will not be going anywhere, Dante assured him, getting to his feet with a smooth, powerful grace. Thank you, Antonio. Marco will show you out. The doctor gathered his things and departed, leaving Dante and me alone in a room that felt suddenly immense and claustrophobic. I perched on the bed in my bra and work trousers, my back a network of bandages. I had never felt more exposed. Dante moved to a dresser and took out what appeared to be a fine silk shirt. Arms up, he murmured. I can dress myself. Indulge me. He knelt down before me again, his touch impossibly careful as he guided my arms into the fabric. He worked the buttons with unhurried precision, his knuckles brushing my collarbone, and every touch felt intentional, possessive. Why are you doing this? I whispered. Why do you care so much? His hands paused at the last button as he met my gaze, so near I could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes and feel the warmth of his breath near my throat. Because you jumped, he said, simply and without pause. You didn't know who we were. You didn't calculate the risk. You just jumped. Do you understand how rare that is, Elena? Genuine selflessness. My entire life has been spent among people who measure every action, every word. And then you, a woman I'd never seen, hurled yourself onto shattered glass for my son. How could I not care about someone capable of such an act? His words wrapped around me, as soft and binding as the silk itself. I don't belong in this world, I said, desperate for him to understand. I don't know the codes, the expectations. I will disappoint you. You already surpassed every expectation just by being alive. Dante's hand came up to frame my face, his thumb tracing my cheek with a devastating gentleness. Sleep now. Tomorrow we can address your new circumstances. But for tonight, you are safe. I give you my word. Safe. The word was supposed to be a comfort. Yet as I watched him go, closing the door quietly, I couldn't help but wonder if safety in Dante Moretti's world was just another name for a gilded cage, and why that thought didn't frighten me nearly as much as it should have. I awoke to sunlight pouring through unfamiliar windows, and the sharp feeling that my back had been set ablaze. Every breath sent fresh waves of pain through my stitches. Every slight motion was a testament to the reality of yesterday. The glass, the blood, the dark-eyed man who had carried me into his stronghold and claimed my debt as his own. The bedside clock read 10:47 a.m. I had slept for 13 hours. Panic seized me instantly. My shift at Aurelio started at 6. Marcus would be furious. Tips would be split without me. I would lose my... Then I remembered. No more Aurelios, no more invisibility, no more normal. A soft knock broke through my spiraling thoughts. Miss Santos? A woman's cautious, accented voice called out. May I come in? Yes, I managed, clutching the silk sheets to my chin, even though I was dressed in Dante's shirt. The door opened, revealing the woman from last night. Agnes. She held a tray with coffee, fruit, and pastries that smelled like paradise. Her grim expression from yesterday had softened. Mr. Moretti requested I bring you breakfast, she said, setting the tray down with practiced ease. And to let you know, Dr. Russo will visit this afternoon to check on your back. She paused, then continued. He also asked me to show you the wardrobe he arranged for this morning. Wardrobe? I echoed, feeling foolish. Agnes went to the closet and opened it, displaying what had to be thousands of dollars in clothing. Jeans, dresses, casual outfits, all looked to be perfectly my size. Shoes were arranged neatly on the bottom, from sneakers to heels I would never dare to wear. When did he? I couldn't articulate the question, overwhelmed by the gesture. Mr. Moretti is very resourceful when he has the proper motivation, Agnes stated plainly. He had his staff working all through the night. Everything ought to fit, but if anything needs changing, the tailor can be recalled. She walked to the door, then paused again. He has asked to see you when you feel prepared. No rush, he specified, though. She almost smiled. He's been checking on you hourly since dawn. Matteo as well. The boy has grown quite attached to you. When she was gone, I sat in the enormous bed, looking at the closet of clothes I never requested, eating food I hadn't paid for, in a house I had no right to be in. A part of me screamed to run, to grab my ruined uniform and just walk out. But Dante's words echoed in my head. Someone wanted to hurt my son. You put yourself between him and that harm. If he was right, leaving this place could be the most dangerous thing I could do. I had been seen, marked, and linked to the Moretz. He promised, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted like forever. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. But inside Dante's fortress, inside the home we'd built from blood and courage and a love neither of us had expected, everything burned warm and bright. I jumped onto glass to save a child, and in doing so, I'd saved myself. Our story was a tapestry woven from darkness and light, violence and tenderness, fear and love so fierce it could weather any storm. And I wouldn't change a single scar. Arms wrapped around me from behind, careful as always of my scars, and Dante's chin rested on my shoulder. What are you thinking about? How different my life is now. I leaned back into his warmth, into the safety and danger he represented in equal measure. How I thought I wanted invisibility, but what I really wanted was to be seen by the right person. And am I the right person? His voice held amusement, but I heard the genuine question beneath. I turned in his arms, meeting those dark eyes that had haunted my dreams since that first night. You're the only person, Dante. But that future had been forged in a place that smelled of dust and fear. I remembered standing in the warehouse, his men like shadows around us, as he stared at me with an intensity that went beyond mere possession. Then you're mine, Elena Santos, he'd growled, his voice low and final, completely, and I take care of what's mine. He kissed me then, a kiss that tasted of violent promises and a future I never knew I wanted, but now couldn't survive without. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. Let's go home. Home. He didn't say his house. He said home. As if I had always been meant to be there, inside his fortress, a part of his dangerous and complicated world. And in that moment, I believed I was. Maybe some people are destined to crash into each other's orbits. As Dante helped me to the car, his arms securely around my waist, I looked back at the warehouse one last time. This was where Elena Santos, the invisible waitress, had died, and where someone who mattered, who belonged, who'd been claimed by a powerful man, had been born. Stand here, Marco ordered, his body shielding me inside a steel-walled command center. What brought me to this bunker deep beneath the estate began with a single, dangerous act of kindness. It all happened because Dante had left for a meeting at 8 at the warehouse, a summit with the Calabrese family. He'd gone to face the men who claimed innocence for the events of last night. His last words to me were a promise of safety, his fingers gently tracing my jaw. I won't let anything happen to you, he'd sworn. You saved my son. That makes you mine to protect. The word mine was still echoing in my mind when I found his son, Matteo, an hour later in a playroom that looked like a toy store had exploded. He was the reason for all of this. The 5-year-old boy launched himself into my arms, asking if I liked dragons because he had 17 of them, his unfiltered joy a sharp contrast to the danger surrounding his father's world. In that room, he asked if I could be like a mommy for a little while, telling me his own had gone to heaven. The innocent request tightened my throat, solidifying a bond I hadn't expected. This small boy, trapped in a violent world, was why I understood Dante's willingness to burn the city down. It's why I hadn't hesitated. Some people just demand to be protected. Matteo was one. As he fell asleep against me, I looked out at the gilded cage of the estate, its beautiful grounds patrolled by armed men. That's when I saw Dante's convoy preparing to leave. He looked up, a shadow in all black, and our eyes met across the courtyard. He raised a hand, not a wave, but a silent vow. I'll come back. Then he was gone. Alone in his library, my old phone buzzed with an unknown number. A distorted voice hissed my name. You should have stayed invisible, little waitress. Complications disappear. the line went dead. Moments later, the door flew open. It was Marco. "We have a situation," he said, his hand on his gun, as he rushed me down here. It was all happening just as Dante had predicted when I first woke up in his house. "Your goodness in a world built on calculated cruelty," he'd said gently. "It makes you unpredictable, valuable." And that's how it all began, with a simple, dangerous act of goodness. Between me and the wrecked door. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Is Dante all right?" Marco nodded grimly, his focus now on me. "The boss handled it. The threat's gone." The world stopped spinning. "What do you mean, gone?" "It means tonight, someone gambled and lost everything." He finally met my gaze, a flicker of true relief in his scarred face. "How did you know my name, Miss Santos?" I don't know. I've used it forever. It's not a secret." Then the memory surfaced. The strange call, 10 minutes before the chaos. They knew who I was, my job with Matteo. They called me a loose end that needed to be tied up. Marco's expression hardened. "Your phone. Let me see it now." My fingers shook as I passed it to him, and I watched him expertly pop out the battery. "They were using this to track you. Probably cloned it after you gave your info at the hospital, or maybe they swiped it from the restaurant's personnel files." He barked an order to another guard. "Sweep the entire estate. If they bugged her phone, who knows what else they planted." The seconds crawled by like hours. I stared at the security monitors, trying to decipher the chaos. The gates, the gardens, the long, quiet drive. It all appeared serene, but the air crackled with the aftershock of violence. Warriors standing down after a battle. Then, on a replay feed, I saw it. A shadow detaching itself from the tree line, followed by another. They were ghosts with military training, sticking to blind spots, but Marco's system was better. It painted them in thermal imaging. "South fence was breached," a voice crackled over the radio. "4 tangos, armed, moving on. The safe house." "Where's Matteo?" I whispered, my voice raw with panic. "He's in the panic room. Reinforced steel, biometric seals. They'd need a tank to get in, and we would have taken them out long before they got that close." Marco was speaking rapidly into his comms in Italian, too quick for me to understand. "But they weren't after Matteo. They were after you. They knew your exact location." "How? How is that possible?" "Because we have a rat," Marco said, his voice turning to ice. "Someone on the inside gave you up." The main power died. Red emergency lights flooded the room in a hellish glow. I heard yelling, the distant retort of gunfire, and then Marco's hand clamped on my arm, pulling me toward a hidden panel. "We're moving you. New location. Stay with me. Don't make a sound. And if I say run, you run. Got it?" I could only nod, my throat tight with fear. The panel slid open, revealing a tunnel. A real underground passage. We sprinted, Marco ahead, 2 guards flanking me from behind, our feet pounding on the concrete. The sound of gunfire echoed from above, getting closer. The sharp scent of cordite started to snake through the vents. "How far out is Dante?" I managed to choke out. 10 minutes. Less, if he's running every red light in the city, which I guarantee he is. Marco yanked me around a corner toward another heavy door that needed his palm and retina to open. But in a gunfight, 10 minutes can be a lifetime. The door hissed open into a garage packed with armored, blacked-out vehicles, all idling. Marco shoved me toward an SUV, but just as we neared it, the main garage entrance disintegrated in a blast of concrete and shrapnel. 3 figures stepped through the dust, rifles up, moving with the chilling economy of professional killers. Marco and his team opened fire instantly. The noise in the enclosed space was deafening, a physical force that left my ears screaming and my mind blank. "Get in the truck!" Marco yelled, pushing me so hard I stumbled, my back erupting in pain as I fumbled with the door handle. A hand grabbed my arm, not Marco's. This grip was brutal, violent. I spun to see a man with empty eyes push a pistol barrel against my temple. Cease fire or she's dead, he shouted in a thick accent. The shooting stopped. Marco was a statue, weapon still aimed but now useless, his face a mask of pure rage. You don't want to do this, he snarled. You can't imagine what Moretti will do if you harm her. Moretti's a dead man walking, the man said coolly, and she's more valuable to us conscious. Our get-out-of-jail-free card didn't count on the Moretti heir having a babysitter with a death wish. Pistol dug deeper into my scalp. Drop your weapons, all of them, now, or I'll redecorate the place with her. I'd never seen Marco hesitate, but for a split second he was torn. He served his boss, and he knew Dante's order would be to save me, no matter the cost. But he was also a soldier trained to never surrender. Do it, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Marco's eyes locked on mine. Miss Santos? Just do it, I pleaded, my voice cracking. I'm not dying for a standoff. His gun hit the concrete with a loud clang, followed by the others. The man holding me grinned, a predator's smile. Good girl. Now, we're taking a little walk. You try any of that heroic nonsense you pulled with the kid, and I'll put a bullet in your knee and drag you out. Understand? I nodded. He started pulling me back toward the gaping hole in the wall. I saw Marco's eyes one last time, and in them, a silent vow. We will get you back. Then I was pulled into smoke and darkness. An idling van waited outside. 2 more men were inside, and I was tossed in the back like a sack of garbage. My head hit the metal floor, making my vision swim. The door slammed, plunging me into darkness. The van screeched away. Over the ringing in my ears, I heard the leader on the phone. We got the girl, Moretti's little project. Tell the boss we're en route to the warehouse. He paused. Yeah, the one at the docks, the original meeting spot. A cold chuckle followed. Let's find out just how much his son's little savior is worth. Lying on the vibrating floor, every injury screaming, I finally understood what Dante meant about owing debts. He owed me for saving his son. But my existence had just created a new debt for him. A liability. A weakness his enemies could now use against him. The only question left was if he'd decide I was worth the price, or if I was just one more problem to be eliminated. The van took a hard right, sending me sliding into the wall. The impact sent a fresh wave of agony through my stitches, but I refused to make a sound, to give them the satisfaction. If this was how I was going to die, it wouldn't be as some nameless victim. It would be as the woman who threw herself on a floor of shattered glass for a child she barely knew. And maybe, just maybe, in the twisted world I'd fallen into, that would be enough to count for something, even if no one ever knew my story. The warehouse smelled of diesel and brine, the scent of 1,000 forgotten deals soaked into the concrete. They'd secured me to a chair in the middle of the cavernous room. The knots were professional, tight enough to hold, but not enough to cut off my circulation. They left me with a single guard while the others prepared for what was coming. We all knew Dante would come. The only unknown was whether he was coming for a rescue or a cleanup. You're pretty composed, the guard noted, leaning against a rusted support beam while smoking. He was young, maybe in his mid-20s, with a scar cutting through one eyebrow. Most people in your shoes are a mess of tears and prayers by now. Would it make a difference? I asked, my voice holding steady. He shrugged. Nah, but it would be better theater. Sorry I'm not more entertaining. A faint smile touched his lips. Is it true? You really took a dive onto broken glass for the Moretti kid? That story wasn't just some made-up crap? It wasn't crap. It was instinct. I shifted, trying to find a less painful position, and felt a sharp tear in my back. The manhandling had popped a few stitches. I could feel the slow, warm trickle of blood against my sweater. He's 5 years old. He shouldn't be paying for the sins of his father. None of us should, the guard said, his voice dropping, a haunted look in his eyes. But we do. That's the way it is. He took a final drag from his cigarette. For the record, I said this was a bad idea. Moretti doesn't make deals when it's about his kid, or anyone close to him. He's going to hit this place like a hurricane, and we're all going to be swept away. Then why are you here? Because I'm already a dead man. We all were the day we signed on for this. He ground the butt out under his boot. But you might not be. If you're smart, you'll tell Moretti everything. Names, faces, every detail you can remember. It might be the only thing that gets you through the night. Just then, the massive roll-up door exploded inward. This wasn't a stealthy entrance. This was an announcement. Dante Moretti strode into the warehouse flanked by a dozen heavily armed men, a palpable wave of cold fury rolling off him. His expensive suit was ripped at the shoulder, and a smear of blood, his or someone else's, stained his white shirt. He moved with the deadly grace of a panther, every step a promise of violence. His eyes found me instantly, and his expression stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't relief. It was a raw, possessive fury. That look said, "Mine, and you dared to touch what is mine." The man who had put the gun to my head, their leader, stepped out of the shadows. He was older, with the calm confidence of a man who had navigated this world for decades. "Moretti, so good of you to make it." "Russo." Dante's voice was a low growl that could freeze fire. "You have 30 seconds to let her go, model." With relief washing over his features, Dante's expression transformed. I knew I meant it when I said, "I choose this. I choose you." In a world of cold apartments and thankless shifts, I had found a man who looked at me like I hung the moon. I thought of his fierce protection, of his son's small hand in mine, and the feeling of being valued, of being seen. There was no going back. This world would test me, he had warned, but I was sure. This moment of certainty had been born from his own vulnerability. "I want you, Elena," he'd admitted, the hope in his voice raw and unexpected. "You've become essential." He'd offered me an escape, a new identity, a safe life away from his darkness. But the thought of returning to a life of being invisible, of not mattering, felt like a cage. And so I asked, what if I want to stay? What if I wanted him? His arms were wrapped carefully around me, his strength the only thing keeping me upright. My legs were weak, but my resolve was not. I looked up at this beautiful, dangerous man and told him I understood. I understood that he was a man of his word, that he valued loyalty above all else, and that he would burn the world down for his son. And somehow, he considered me worth protecting too. His reason was simple. Because you jumped. He caught me when I swayed, the adrenaline of the night finally giving way to exhaustion. "You should have let Marco take you to the car," he said, his voice quiet. But I couldn't. I needed to see it through, to understand what I had become a part of. Just moments before, the cavernous warehouse had fallen silent, the air thick with the aftermath of violence that never fully erupted. Russo and his men were gone, vanishing like rats from a sinking ship. Their frantic escape was the direct result of Dante's final chilling command. "Get out of my sight," he had ordered a broken Russo. He had spared the man's life, a mercy earned only because I was released unharmed. But the price was steep. Russo would leave the city that night, forfeiting his entire operation, every penny and every contact. It all belonged to Dante now. A reminder that a Moretti's mercy was worth more than gold. And I had witnessed it all, because I had refused to be sheltered. "I want to see who you really are," I'd insisted, my voice steady despite the pain from my torn stitches. Dante had studied me then, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, before nodding. "Stay behind me," was all he said, accepting my entry into his world. He then turned to Russo, the gentle man who had freed me vanishing, replaced by the monster who ruled through fear. His gentleness as he knelt to untie my wrists was a shocking contrast to the violence that had radiated from him moments before. The ropes fell away, and his arm was there instantly to support me. "They'll pay for every moment of fear they caused you," he promised, his voice a low growl meant only for me. He had stepped across the space between us just after Russo, with hands raised in surrender, finally gave in. "She's yours. Take her." That surrender was bought with terror. Dante had taken one step forward, his voice dropping as he promised not a quick death, but weeks of creative suffering. He spoke of Russo's daughter in Milan, his mother in Naples, promising to make them witness his agony. He knew I was a debt written in blood and glass, a price Russo couldn't afford. He watched the uncertainty crack Russo's facade as his hand trembled against my temple. Each second had stretched into an eternity. Russo had pressed the cold metal of his gun to my head, screaming, "Everyone stands down or I blow her brains out." He was using me as a shield, believing Dante would never risk me in the crossfire. But I saw the calculation in Dante's eyes, the angles, the trajectories. I saw the moment he decided my worth. His expression said it all. Everything. The chaos erupted after Dante's first move. His men and Russo's drew their weapons in a blur, trapping me in the center of a standoff that could level the building. 10 seconds, Dante had said, his own gun now visible, its barrel smoking in the cold air. It was a demonstration, not a warning. He hadn't even looked at the guard he shot, the one with the scarred eyebrow. His eyes remained locked on Russo, promising he was next. 20 seconds, Dante had stated, his voice calm amidst the tension. Russo, smiling, thought he had the upper hand, trying to trade me for information. He called Dante dramatic, believing he was bluffing, that he wouldn't risk my life. But Russo made a fatal miscalculation. He saw me as a bargaining chip. He didn't understand that 2 days earlier, he wasn't kidnapping some random woman. He was taking the person who had thrown her body over shattered glass to save Dante Moretti's son. The transformation had cost me blood and the illusion of safety, but he'd claimed me because I had become a target. I remembered him sitting across from me in his study, his focus entirely on me. It wasn't an accident, he'd said. The woman who dropped the glasses, Sophie, received a call 30 minutes before her shift. She was nervous. The crash was a planned distraction, meant to cause chaos and pull his men away from Matteo. What they didn't anticipate, he continued, his jaw tightening, was you. My mouth went dry. Who would want to hurt a child? Many people want to hurt me, Elena, he'd answered, a deep weariness in his eyes for the first time. Matteo is simply the most effective way to do so. He'd leaned back, explaining he had enemies, rivals who thought killing his son would weaken him or start a war. And they're not wrong, he'd admitted, his expression turning dark. He told me Sophie claimed her daughter was threatened. We're tracking the man now. Dante's tone promised a swift, unpleasant end for him. But your concern is that by getting involved, you've become part of this. They know your face. They knew my face because I was no longer invisible. I was a Moretti possession. The thought should have terrified me, but it felt like a strange relief to finally matter. I remembered showering carefully, keeping the bandages dry, and dressing in jeans and a sweater that fit perfectly. Of course they did. Dante Moretti did nothing by half measures, especially for the woman who saved his son. Agnes found me wandering the hall. He's in his study, she'd pointed. He was on the phone, his Italian clipped and dangerous. But when he saw me, his entire demeanor shifted. He ended the call mid-sentence. Elena. He circled the desk with a predator's grace that made my pulse quicken. How are you feeling? Like I was used as a pincushion, I admitted, but alive. And I was alive because of one single moment. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.